I'm going to kind of assuming that most of you know, but in case you don't know who Jillian Michaels is, Jillian Michaels is a fitness guru, expert, nutrition expert. She was on The Biggest Loser. I think it was an NBC show, and she was on that show for years. And I met this gentleman who uses his relationship with her to market and to sell products and services to his clients. He's actually quite good at celebrity branding and celebrity branded marketing. And so he had kind of offered this thing where you could go and sit and listen to him on Zoom, interview Jillian Michaels. And then after the interview, he offered, for the right bold price of $1,000, you could get 7 minutes of time with Jillian Michaels. Now, I didn't know Jillian Michaels really from Adam. I kind of knew who she was, but I'd never seen the show. I'd never heard anything really about her or not. And so I was going to get 7 minutes with Jillian Michaels. And so I researched her because I really didn't know who the hell she was. And so I learned a few things, and I was nervous. It was my first major interview with a major kind of celebrity. And I was so nervous when I got ready to get on the call. And then I had a moment of clarity. And I said to myself, I was like, Christine, you will never know as much about fitness and nutrition as Jillian Michaels. But Jillian Michaels will never know as much about negotiation as you do. And so it set that mental reset, set the stage for me to turn my 7 minutes with Jillian into 14 minutes. That 14 minutes ended with her inviting me to do a 20-minute segment on her podcast. My 20-minute segment turned into 2.5 hours. And my 2.5 hours with her turned into an incredible relationship with her publicist, her producer, and she agreed to write the foreword to my book. And so that relationship, just like all relationships, was negotiated. And so I just want to read a little bit about what she said. When I first learned that I would be interviewing an expert negotiator for a podcast, I will admit I was a bit skeptical. After all, I am an authority in the health and wellness space, and negotiation feels so, well, stuffy. But my publicist insisted that I give this woman a shot, and my publicist has never steered me wrong. So I put the podcast interview in my schedule and logged in when it was time. Christine McKay was not at all what I expected. Far from the stuffed shirt, stiff negotiation expert I'd imagined, she was a fun, energetic force, and the conversation with her was one I truly enjoyed. Our conversation helped me recognize that we are all in constant negotiation without realizing it. Co-parenting is a negotiation. Working with clients is a negotiation. Signing a contract for a TV show is a negotiation. Heck, even being interviewed for a podcast is a negotiation. With her unique and insightful understanding that negotiation is all about relationship building, both in the business world and in life, Christine's approach is what we all need more of. Our interview and this book had me renegotiate my views on negotiation. It will do the same for you. I'm just so honored that she took time to do that and to write that for me. And thank you, Farhana. Farhana is going to put some things in the chat. As Farhana mentioned, I have a program called Venn Masters. It is all about negotiation. It is all about taking people's negotiation to the next level. And for somebody here today, we're going to give away 100% scholarship to that program. All right. So the hardest part of any negotiation happens between your ears. And in case you have the book and you want to read along, I am on page 20. So the hardest part of any negotiation happens between your ears. How do you react emotionally when you're in that process of negotiating against ourselves, where your heart is saying that this is what I want, but your head is saying, oh, no, that's too high risk. You can't ask for that. Your mind will convince you that they're going to hate you. They're going to think you're a fool or an idiot. You're asking too much. You're not worth this. Maybe so-and-so could get this, but you certainly can't get that. You believe that you're not qualified enough. Whatever that I'm not kind of language is, it's because your subconscious mind is our subconscious mind is trying to protect us. It's all about that protection mode and making sure that we don't put ourselves in danger. It really likes to keep things just in the status quo. Your brain spends an inordinate amount of time talking you out of doing things that would put you in a better position because it's all nice and warm and cozy right where it is. When I was training for my black belt in martial arts, one of my instructors once explained, when it comes to making changes in our lives, people are kind of screwed. Why? Because the human being consists mainly of water and electricity. Water seeks its lowest level, and electricity seeks the path of least resistance. When we're trying to climb out of something, we're going against physics that try to keep us down. What ends up happening is that people who are down in the hole with us, they see us start to climb, but they're not climbing. That makes them feel inadequate and makes them feel less than. So instead of rising with you, they try to pull you down. For me, I was able to be tenacious because I had people around me who kept helping to pull me up. Whenever I started to go back down again, they were there pulling me up. That includes my children, who were the ages of 3, 4, and 5 when I was at Rensselaer, my undergrad program. My oldest daughter ultimately sacrificed a lot of her childhood so that I could go to school and find a better way of being a mom and providing a better life for them. It really was my whole family that helped make everything possible. All right. I want to talk a little bit about, now I'm on page 26. Accomplishment journal. So I'm going to add a caveat to this. So whenever we get into this mode, right, of, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, etc., we forget. Our minds are so fixated on what we don't have, what we cannot get, what we think we can't get. And so early in my life, I realized that we actually get a lot more yeses in our lives than we do nos. But we tend to only focus on the nos because we're not keeping track of the yeses. So the accomplishment journal. Many business coaches in the personal development space advocate that as an employee or an entrepreneur, it's beneficial to make value lists of what we bring to the table. I've not made value lists. It depends on your personality. If you're someone who's motivated by seeing something in writing, you should absolutely do that. Instead, I advocate that you keep an accomplishments journal. It's more practical for me. Daily, I write down what I accomplished today. And let me tell you, there are some days when I got out of bed and brushed my teeth. There have been those days over the years when that was a significant accomplishment. But then there are days when I've closed billion-dollar deals that are on that list. And over time, what happens is when I'm not in a positive place, I go back and look at the accomplishment journal. I look at all the fantastic things I've done. The value list is somewhat similar in that you keep track of the value you've added to the relationship or relationships. You track that, and you have a way of monitoring that. I prefer to do that through testimonials. When people tell me that I've done a great job, I'll keep track of that information as a way of tracking my value. I think of that as a more powerful way of doing it. Then it's somebody else's words and not just my own. It gives me an external voice. When I don't feel that I add value, then I have another external voice saying, no, you're adding a great deal of value. And this is where you did it and how you did it and why that's amazing. Last week, I had the opportunity to travel and speak in Atlanta and in Tampa. And when I was in Atlanta, this woman messaged me on Facebook. And her name is Marilyn. I think she signed up, but I don't see her here. But she lives about 85 minutes north of where I was speaking. She messaged me on Facebook and said, "How long are you going to be there?" I told her. And she's like, "Well, I can't get there until a little bit later." But she drove 85 minutes to come see me, brought her copy of the book so that I could sign and autograph it for her, and left 10 minutes later. Talk about an accomplishment, right? And when I go into a negotiation, right, I can remember that experience with Marilyn. It adds, it validates me. It reinforces who I am. It gives me strength, and it gives me positive, it gives me, and it makes me feel more positive. And that's a powerful tool in terms of how you can be effective at negotiating. Another part of the book, I apologize, my dog is saying hello. So this is Nyx. If you get a whole picture of Nyx, that's Nyx. I talk about smiling in the book and how important it is to smile when, and it sounds so silly to say, but it's hugely important, not just for your counterpart, but it's harder to get mad at somebody who's smiling, to be honest. But it's really for me. I want to smile. I want to feel positive about what I'm doing, and keeping an accomplishments journal helps me to do that. Oh, Stever, I love that. The known knows. We're gonna talk about that in a little bit. All right. So, all right. One of the other things that is, oh, and I want to say a little bit about, so Venn, right? Before I read a couple more sections, Venn. People ask me all the time, "Christine, what the hell is Venn diagram? What's the Venn thing? Where'd you come up with Venn?" And I usually, my thinking is usually, well, if you were good in math or you loved math, then you automatically know what the Venn is. And if you hated math, then you've forgotten what the Venn is. But and I don't really talk about this specifically in the book, but there are three key elements to every negotiation, just to kind of give you guys a little bit of stuff today too, beyond the book. And those three elements are you, your counterpart, and the situation that you're negotiating. An agreement happens when all three of those things intersect. It happens at just that intersection point. And so if you're curious about you're curious about your counterpart, and you're curious about the situation, you're going to be able to find agreement in almost every negotiation that you are in. And so that's the source of the Venn diagram. At Harvard, they call the overlap, the intersection point, the ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement. And we call it the Venn zone, hence the podcast name, In the Venn Zone. So that's just a little bit about the Venn diagram. All right. Does anyone have any questions so far? Just throw them in the chat or come off mute. We don't have a huge group, so. All right, you guys are the first time I've ever done this, so you can tell me if it's any good or if it sucks or whatever. so I'm super nervous because this is like, it's the weirdest feeling. It is such a weird feeling to have my own book in my hands and to be reading it to a bunch of adults. It's the most bizarre feeling. I can't even tell you how surreal it is. So, all right. So I'm going to keep going. But if you have questions, throw them in the chat. All right. On the power of intentional listening, which is on page 66. Listening. Oh, yeah. Well, I forgot Stever's there. Okay, listening is a full contact sport. I believe this wholeheartedly. Intentional listening is what I consider to be a full contact sport. It requires all of you, all of your being, all of your senses to listen with intent. People will talk about active listening. The challenge I have with the concept of active listening is it doesn't involve all of the senses. It's more around waiting to speak until somebody finishes speaking. But active listening doesn't include how important it is to observe all of the aspects of how someone is communicating to you. It's more what you do with your ears and not about overall communication. Intentional listening is something you do by paying attention to somebody's words, tone, and nonverbals, as well as observing the cues they give you about who they are. When you observe how somebody is behaving, their body language, their nonverbal cues, their micro expressions, you can see those nanosecond moments when somebody does something telling. It reflects more on their face than it does in the words that they are speaking. A UCLA study suggests that 93% of communication has nothing to do with the words that are coming out of somebody's mouth. It has to do with tone and body language. I've traveled outside the United States and negotiated with people whose primary language is not English. When they speak their native language, I can tell by their body language whether they are happy or frustrated. Even if I don't fully understand their language, I can tell whether they have contempt for what's said. And if I see some other major emotions, I can tap into them because I have that observation intentionally. The intentional listening activity is a very comprehensive activity to pay attention to what's not spoken, but rather what's being communicated overall in the discussion. As Americans, we tend to speak very, very quickly. Again, I'm intentional about my communication, and I make sure to speak slowly. I will ask people to please let me know if I'm talking too quickly. In a post-pandemic world, wearing a mask is challenging for people who have hearing loss and who read lips. And that would be me, by the way. I started using a pad of paper, especially in video meetings. Using a pad of paper or a small erasable whiteboard to make notes or draw pictures is a useful tool to help overcome these challenges. But even still, much communication happens with people's eyes. You may not hear the words that are being said and need to ask somebody to repeat them, but you can tell by how they're communicating with their eyes what their general disposition is on what it is that you're saying. So I worked for a very, very large bank in Europe, and I helped them divest 98 different businesses across the globe. And I was working in Panama City, not Florida, but in Panama. And I had a team from Mexico, a team from Panama, a team from England, and the buyer was from Colombia. Now, none of the English people were in the room. I was the only native English speaker. Everyone else spoke native Spanish. Well, unless you ask the Mexicans, they'd say Panamanians don't speak Spanish. And so even amongst the Spanish-speaking people, there's these huge dialect differences. Their intonations are very different, et cetera. And we were all in this room. I think there were like 11 or 12 of us. We were all in this room. And they started speaking in English. And I was like, why are you speaking in English? I am the lowest common denominator in this room, right? Just because I don't speak Spanish doesn't mean you should be, and I only speak English, doesn't mean you should be negotiating this in my language. So they switched to Spanish. I was able to negotiate the deal by watching how people behaved, how they interacted with each other, their facial expressions. And it was uncanny. I didn't need to have the words. I didn't need to know what was being said to know how people were reacting to what was being said. And once I had made those observations, I was able to take my team from Panama, and we were able to have secondary conversations off to the side, and I could say, this is what I observed at this point in the conversation and at this point in the conversation. And I was able to give guidance even though I didn't speak a word of Spanish, right? And so it is astonishing the things that we can learn from other people just by being observant of how things are being said, the body positions that people are assuming. Are they leaning in? Are they leaning back? Have they pushed away from the table? Are there, there's a lot of things around, are their arms folded? Are they not? Are they, don't do the lift eyes to the left and to the right, because that's a bunch of baloney. But learn some of those things, because those things can be very, very valuable to you. All right. Well, we all know that I love David and Goliath negotiations. I just flipped to that page. I didn't actually have it marked. It just opened up there. So because I know some of you do David and Goliath negotiations. So you can't win a relationship, but you can get more value out of it. So in preceding chapter 4, and I'm on page 86, in chapter 4, I introduced the concept of David and Goliath negotiations. It deserves a deeper dive into what that looks like, as there are many misnomers in these kinds of negotiations. David and Goliath negotiations are when a smaller company or an entrepreneur works with larger businesses, which often have extensive checks and balances systems. Getting anything done, anything approved, takes forever. And you have a dozen people that have to sign off on it. That being the case, the length of time needed to get things done, things moving, may work in your favor or against you in the negotiation. The time required on the part of a larger company to go through the approvals process, and whether that's an advantage or a disadvantage, is very dependent on the deal situation. You may have a situation where you have to make an emergency purchase because you don't have enough software, or you're using more software than what you have or are allowed. Maybe you have equipment that fails and you need to replace it. It's not under warranty and you need a new contract. And by the way, you're kind of screwed right now because there's a supply chain crunch and nobody's getting anything. So perhaps you have a quick change of suppliers, or you have to have a quick change of suppliers or add a distributor. You may need to get approvals rather quickly for that negotiation. For a larger company, that can be a disadvantage in that scenario. They're just not as nimble. They're not nimble enough and cannot act fast enough to get that put together. My attorney friends may not like it when I say this, but that's okay. In my experience, the reality is that business is often not stopped or thwarted because you don't have a complete contract. Now, the people who worked with me at Pulse Secure know this to be an absolute fact, because at Pulse Secure, Juniper Networks spun off Pulse Secure, which was a product line, and none of the contracts came with that transaction. And what a mess that was. And we had to negotiate every major contract with every major customer that we had. And guess what? The number of deals, oh my gosh, the number of procurement people who would get on the phone and say, we've got to have a contract. We've got to have a contract. And Tom, I can see him smirking over there because he knows. And it's like, nah, we want them to buy under our very general terms and conditions. So we're going to just work to make that happen. And we did, because you didn't have to have a contract. I've worked on M&A transactions that are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, billion-dollar transactions. My largest deal was $2.4 billion. And guess what? We did not have all the contracts in place. We did for the sale of the property, but there are a bunch of other contracts that come into play when you're selling or buying a company that we didn't have totally fully done, and that's okay. In fact, I was on a webinar earlier this year with the CEO of BioNTech. BioNTech is the partner is Pfizer's partner in developing the COVID vaccine, and there's a third company that's part of that relationship as well. Just throw quickly in the chat how long they were working together before they had commercial terms ironed out for that deal. So I think they announced the deal in January or February of 2020. So what month do you think that they had the terms and conditions ironed out? Just throw some guesses in the chat. I'm trying to give my voice a little bit of a break. June, November, January 2020. So most of us would think, because we were trained that you're supposed to have a contract before you do anything. These three companies worked together without general terms and conditions, no idea how they were going to separate money or who was going to absorb cost or any of that. They worked strictly under a memorandum of understanding for 9.5 months. They didn't have a contract till October. And the CEO of BioNTech said that experience is going to change how they do contracting going forward. Because one thing they learned in the pandemic is that we've spent all this time and energy trying to contract the kitchen sink and to come up with every possible scenario of things that are going to go wrong. And if 2020 taught us anything, we don't know squat about what can go wrong. So how is that going to change how we do contracts going forward? And so when you're thinking about David and Goliath negotiations, and you think about you as a smaller business, or even if you work for a Goliath organization, how can you think differently about that relationship so that you are getting more of what you want? All right. So the last section I'm going to read is on page 108 on when to disengage and walk away. A boiling teapot eventually runs out of steam. I think people tend to stay too late in a negotiation that isn't working. In chapter 4, I talked about the power of the full stop sentence and how important those two little letters N and O can be. The thing is, many times people get into this mentality in negotiations and will say, I have to close this deal, especially feeding off the previous chapter with David and Goliath negotiations. It goes towards people's motivations and why they do things. As soon as you convince yourself that you must close a deal, you have put yourself in an unfavorable position for advocating for what you want. You can become too focused on closing the final deal, overlooking the pieces and parts that are a component of that overall deal. In my experience, people often enter into contracts when they should have probably walked away. It can be because the person they're negotiating with was being a bully. It could also be because they failed to see how negatively a point they ended up agreeing to would impact their business. That could happen mostly if they're not prepared enough. They've not articulated clearly what their goals and objectives are from the negotiation. They don't understand the impact a proposal may have on their overall business. When that happens, they often find reasons to live with a deal that's not in their best interest instead of walking away. 3 days before on March 13th of 2020, one of my friends signed a 10-year lease on new restaurant space. They didn't do a very effective job of looking at the situation, exploring what was really going on, being curious enough about themselves and how much risk they could take, being curious enough about what that would mean for their landlord, who has a terrible reputation in Los Angeles. And they certainly weren't curious about the situation that they were negotiating. And so, if they, obviously, and they ended up, they have already actually gone out of business. And so, when we give ourselves permission to say no, recently I started saying, when I speak on stage, freedom starts with no, right? No gives us the latitude to say yes to other things. So when we say no to the wrong deals, that gives us the ability to say yes to more right deals. And when I was talking to somebody last week, and they had a business situation that went awry, and they said, it took me completely by surprise. And my comment back, which he's a good friend of mine, but he wasn't really happy with my comment, was, I don't believe that, because it's very, very rare that a relationship goes bad in a moment. It does happen, but it's not very, very common. A relationship usually goes bad over time. And at some point, we don't see, and we try to do things and we are like, okay, that was, that completely took me by surprise. And my view is a bad deal for me is a bad deal for you, or a bad deal for you is a bad deal for me. I just may not realize it yet. And so using no as your way of staking your claim to freedom, so that you are giving yourself permission to say yes to the things that matter more to you in your life, gives you a lot of latitude, gives you a lot of opportunity to grow and expand, both in your business and in your personal life. All right, so that's my reading of my book, my very surreal, weird experience of reading my book. So we have about 20 minutes. I am happy to open it up. I have any dialogue. You can ask me any question, and if I don't want to answer it, I'll tell you. So, but yeah, just come off mute. Well, and if you haven't bought the book, I know Farhana had put a link in to buy the book. If you let's see, what I'm looking at, what she wrote in there. Yeah. So she put it in there. I'm going to be traveling a lot. So go ahead, Farhana.
I'll put it again so everyone has it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And is anyone kind of dealing with any negotiations or have anything that they're kind of working on that need a little advice? Because this is your opportunity to get some free advice.
I'm going to ask, so Tom, hi, Tom, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you for a long time.
I didn't get dressed for the seminar, so that's why I'm invisible today.
It's good.
I'm wearing clothes, but
it's good to hear from you. So Tom posted in the chat, would love to know how you happened to become a master negotiator. Did it just happen naturally? And then Stever added, she has 3 kids. So I actually talk a little bit about this at the front end of the book. And when I speak, I talk about it. I learned to negotiate because I had to. I either was going to die and take my kids with me, or I was going to learn how to ask. And so after I had quit living in the back of my car, and I was married to this not so nice guy, and he didn't believe that I should work or that I should be in school. And but he couldn't feed us. He couldn't support us. So we were doing our grocery shopping at local food banks. I literally would go through a garbage can to be able to put gas in my car. And, we'd boil water on the stove to do baths, give our kids baths and stuff. And one day, my oldest daughter was hungry. It was lunchtime. And all I had in my house was a single can of tomato soup, and she hated tomato soup because it burned her mouth. And so she did what any self-respecting 3-year-old would do, and she threw a temper tantrum. And it was then that I decided that I couldn't keep living the way that I was living. It wasn't, I had all these big dreams and aspirations, and hell, I'd written down on a thing and prayed to God that I was going to go to Harvard. I told a welfare officer I was going to go to Harvard. And that was a hell of a long way from the life that I was living at the time. And so I started asking. I started getting clear on what it was I wanted, and I started asking for help. And I made sure to surround myself with people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, that I could lean on, that I could ask for help, and who were there for me, who were champions for me, who elevated me, who helped me believe more in myself and see more in myself. And it was through that process that I started to learn to ask. And then the other part was that in Asia, you don't sit and talk all the time like we do in the United States. You sit and listen and you observe. And as a woman in Southeast Asia in the early and mid 90s, trust me, and part of what made me successful in Asia at the time was that I worked with an attaché. So I worked in Seoul. I negotiated with Korea Telecom. there, and Daycom, another telco company. And I made my company provide me with an attaché who happened to be a guy who played for the Korean National Baseball League in the Olympics. And he made sure I knew where to sit in a car, who to bow to, how low, how high, when. He made sure everything. He was like, he educated me. Like, I remember one time we were walking down the street and people used to stop and ask him for his autograph. And he took me and he saw this, or I saw this leather jacket that I wanted to get my husband, but he made sure that I did all the right things in order to negotiate for the leather jacket. I mean, it was crazy. I would never have been able to be successful if it hadn't been for him teaching me how to be quiet and observe. And those are the two things. So poverty got me to learn to ask, and being in a culture where I wasn't generally respected as a woman, and where I totally couldn't understand any of the language, speaking, written, or anything, forced me to have to listen. And yes, 3 kids. All right. Okay. Hi, Stever. All right. So questions, thoughts on the book?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
Which you couldn't hear because I was on mute. So I was talking and
there you go.
Nothing coming across. My aspiration is to be a mime. So I was involved. I was working for a company last year, and I was supposed to be paid by becoming a partner when we raised a fund. And it was a 3-month consulting contract, and then we extended the contract, but we didn't do it formally. There was nothing in writing. But I basically kept working with the idea that my back pay would all roll over into equity in the fund we were raising. Long story short, for various reasons, the fund did not come to pass because the 2 founders of the company went and took jobs, very lucrative jobs elsewhere. So I'm now in a negotiation to get back pay for 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what my position is. My position is I deferred income into equity. There was no equity offered, but I'm perfectly willing to take payment in cash. I have no negotiating leverage whatsoever. The amount of money is small enough that lawyers have told me, lawyers have basically said you can't sue for this. And I would like, if possible, to preserve my friendship with these 2 guys. Just any hints or tips? Happy to answer any questions about it, to give you more context, but that's my situation.
So I'd love to just, let's get on a call and I can help you more with that. And the big thing is kind of how much time have you spent understanding exactly what their rationale was for taking a job versus continuing down the path, what fears motivated them to do that. And kind of what your ask means relative to those fears and those realities.
We have spent some time, I'm in Massachusetts. We have spent some time talking about those things. And what's weird is they took the job because honestly, we had plans to grow this company. It was a little private equity firm. The deal they were offered to leave their own firm was basically game over amount for most of, it was an unbelievable deal, absolutely unbelievable. I would have done the same thing. The part where we seem to be in conflict or in disagreement is one of the 2 of them has said, oh, back when we were first negotiating with you to come on board, I told you that there was a maximum amount of money that I wanted to spend. This was for the 3-month contract. And that was what the 3-month contract was for that maximum amount of money. He seems to feel that the other 9 months that I worked for them, somehow I did that for free, and they shouldn't be expected to have to pay for it because they told me up front that he told me up front that he only wanted to pay for this 3-month chunk, which was why I was wanted to take the rest in equity. My position is you didn't deliver the equity. and we had a rate set by that 3-month contract. It was a monthly rate, and that and when the contract ran out, neither of us, and I own my lack of thing, neither of us talked to the other about it. My assumption was that I was just continuing at the same rate. It was accruing. Their assumption, or I don't know if the two of them, but certainly the one partner who's talked to me, his assumption seems to have been that I was not accruing anything and was working for free.
Let's get on the phone, Steve, and I can help you think that through. I have some thoughts and ideas on that.
Awesome.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. That's a common thing, though. I mean, we go into business. Like I have somebody who I worked with earlier this year who went into, the idea was that this company was going to invest equity in his business. And then it kind of got messy somehow. And so the company was like, we're just going to make you an employee. And then instead of making the investment, and the company's here in California, and the guy I know is in Denver or in Utah. And so then my client's wife found out that now you're getting taxed as an employee when she thought this was an investment. And I mean, it was an absolute mess, and it still is a mess. And so, when we go into business with people we know, our tendency is to trust that the right thing is going to happen. The challenge with that is we don't understand what external factors are influencing that person to drive certain behaviors in different ways, because we all get triggered by different things, and we all have these knee-jerk reactions under different circumstances. And it's one of the things that, and my next book, which I'm in the process of writing, is called How You Ask Matters, Turning Negotiation Styles into Strategies, because how we ask for things matters. The level of curiosity that we have about ourselves and what drives our emotional behavior is really significant. And when we acknowledge that, one, we are emotional, and we actually feel before we think. And that's true in negotiation. This concept of it's just business is bullshit. And this concept of control your emotions is also bullshit. You cannot control how you freaking feel. You just feel. You can control how you act on your feelings. That is where you have control, and that is where you have choice. You can't choose how you feel. You just feel. And so in negotiation, acknowledging that, and one of the things that I've really started doing a lot around is around transparency in that emotion. Actually saying, so this is a silly example, but my book cover. So I got my book cover, and my editor was like super excited about it. She's like, oh my God, it's amazing. She's like, see, it's like so on brand. It's like so amazing. And she was so excited, and I got it, and I felt myself getting pissed off. I could feel the energy kind of start to rise from my gut up. And instead of reacting to that, instead of saying, because she's going, what do you think? What do you think? And she just kept peppering me with, what do you think? Oh my God, I love it. What do you think? Instead of reacting, I said, I'm not feeling really good about it, and I'm not sure why. So I'm going to take some time, and I'm going to sit with this emotion, and I'm going to come back to you and let you know what about it is bothering me so that we can move forward from that. And what I realized is one of the guys who works for Hannah's team, Lorenzo, he had designed my podcast cover art. And the editor for the book, the designer for the cover, had taken his work and used it as the foundation for the book cover. Now, on the surface, most people would go, well, big freaking deal. I mean, it's on brand. It's like, that's great, right? Except that I live in Los Angeles, where I have a deep respect for artists' work, and my daughter is an artist, and I have this deep respect for the work that artists do. And I have a deep respect for making sure that they have recognition and rights to and ownership of that art. And so it was simply solved by my reaching out to Farhana and Lorenzo saying, hey, are you okay if we use the cover art for the foundation as the basis for the book cover? And I'll give you credit for it in the book. And he's got credit in the book. And that solved the problem. But what most people would have done is just reacted. And so, giving ourselves the ability to explore, acknowledge the emotions. And Steve, I think that there's clearly emotion, not just on your side, but on the other side too. And creating space to actually explore how that feels in a non-judgmental way is a huge opportunity. I talk in the book about a divorce that I did this year. And in the book, I don't say the outcome of the divorce. The outcome was that, so it started out with him saying, I'm taking 70% and she can take 30. And if she doesn't like it, she can freaking sue me. I don't care. Right. That was how it started. 4 days later, he's on the phone with me and he said, I'll give her all of it. She's on the phone with me that day going, well, I did this and it was my property before, and I did this and I did this. And after talking to me, she gave him 50% of it back plus $50,000 because he had loaned it to her for her business. And they call it a good karma divorce. They'd been married for over 20 years, and they can look back at that time, not in hate and anger, not thinking they'd wasted all that time with this individual, but they can look back at that time and hold that person with respect and remember the good times that they had. And I apply those same things to business.
I have a question.
Yep. Hi, Joe.
Hi there. How you doing?
Good to see you again. I just saw Joe in Tampa and we met for the first time. I met him and his lovely wife, and we had a great conversation.
Oh, yes. It was fantastic. I got the pleasure of giving Christina a ride to the airport, so I squeezed out a little extra time. So the question I have is, you obviously poured your heart out into this book. Were there certain portions of it that were either maybe more difficult to put in words, or fit into just kind of the amount of space that you wanted to give to them, or potentially other areas that you say these areas most resonate with the message that I'm trying to deliver? Are there certain areas of the book basically that mean more to you for some reason or another than others?
Well, there's honestly one section of the book that I hate. I read it and I was like, oh, I can't believe that's still in there. I don't like it. I'm not going to tell you which one. I'll let you figure it out. But there is a section of the book that I'm not really excited about, that doesn't get me. It feels very dry and not as beneficial as some of the other parts. I mean, the parts of the book that I love are the parts where I'm able to bring a story, where I have a story that actually illustrates what I'm trying to talk about. One of my big frustrations about the topic of negotiation is that, and I actually say this in the book, that it's typically a topic that's reserved for hostage negotiators, lawyers, and academics. And we don't talk about it in its like real pragmatic kind of, not in an Ivy League way, not in a life and death way, but we don't talk about it as a conversation. So my favorite parts of the book are the parts where I'm talking about it as a conversation and not like just a run of information, because that's what's important to me. To me, how you learn, how people learn. And it's one of the things that I do in my Venn Masters program, because we learn in very different ways. And so like in Venn Masters, I use like the first class is we talk about a film. We talk about a movie that I have everybody watch, and it's a family movie and it's a fun movie. And we talk about that movie and what scenes were where there are negotiation scenes and what was effective and ineffective. When I talk about Multicultural negotiations. Stephen Ambrose's Undaunted Courage is one of my favorite books on multicultural negotiation. The Lewis and Clark expedition negotiated with 24 native tribes, of which my father lived on one of the reservations from one of those tribes. And, you know, that conversation, that's the part of the book that I really love, is when there's that conversation component. And it was hard to keep it throughout, and select stories that were really relevant, that would resonate with a broad audience. So did that answer your question, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. And Paul, I saw you had a question in the chat. Would you consider one of the big issues in negotiation is a lack of spending time to understand the other person's point of view? Yes, absolutely. I'll talk about this more in the next book. But in the front end of the book, there's a kind of a preview of the next book where we talk a little bit about negotiation styles. And there are 4 different styles. There's a champion, a maverick, an ambassador, and a benefactor. And 10% are champions, 55% are mavericks, 25% are ambassadors, and about 10% are benefactors. The maverick and the champion, they do. So 65% of negotiators spend virtually no time at all trying to understand their counterpoint's point of view. And when they do it superficially. And they do it that way because very few of us spend enough time understanding our own point of view, what's really important to us. We look at superficial things. I talk in the book about how price, and I know some people here are in sales. I talk about how price should be an output of a negotiation, not an input. Yet we look at it as an input in most cases. And the reason why we do that is because it's something that's super simple for us to look at. It's very fast, it's very easy. But if you spent time unpacking what are the assumptions that led to that price, and you start negotiating what those assumptions are, you're able to get a lot further in a conversation because you open that conversation up. And once you get an agreement on the assumptions, guess what? The price is just that output, and it's harder to negotiate. It's harder to be pissed off about the price when you've agreed to all of the math that goes into generating the price. And so that's why so when it comes to, oh, thank you, Tom. I miss working with you too. Tom and I worked at Pulse Secure together, one of my favorite salespeople on the planet. And so the thing is that if you think about kind of that understanding of a person's point of view, right? I had this really, like, if I hold this up, right? You know, what's the first thing that you notice on this? Now, a couple of you might notice the same thing at the same time, right? Or if you look at me and my background, what's the first thing you notice, right? And different people will pick up different things, and perspective matters. And we don't ask effective enough questions, which is also one of the reasons why one of the things that we do a lot in this Ben Masters program is actually teach how to ask effective questions. Stop asking why of your counterparts. Just get rid of that question from your vernacular. And here's the rationale for that. Right now, some of you know me really well, and some of you are just meeting me really for the first time. My hair right now is actually tame as hell. It's so tame. It's like, this is like, I'm looking at it going, oh my God, something's definitely off about my hair. It's not nearly as vibrant and bright. And if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see me with like glowing pink hair, glowing purple and green hair. I mean, it's just, yeah, my hair's all over the place. My hair usually matches my brand colors in one way, shape, or form. And it is whatever my hairstylist sits and decides when I sit in his chair. It's whatever he feels like he wants to do that day. And I'm totally okay with that. Until the pandemic, when I did green and I had a Tony Robbins event and the green didn't pick up on my green screen and I had hole in the head disease until I could get back in and get my hair fixed, which was hilarious. But the thing is that when somebody says to me, So Christine, why do you color your hair funny, weird colors? Or why do you color your hair like you do? Right? The first thing I have to do is I either have to defend myself, I have to justify my position, I have to come up with some way of rationalizing why I do that. And it's a judgment statement. It's a judgment question. It's all judgment in that question. And so when I'm negotiating, unless I'm intentionally trying to pass judgment and letting my counterpart know that I'm passing judgment, I avoid why like crazy, because it doesn't move me forward. And really working with big companies, that I learned this decades ago. If you're negotiating with Boeing or Verizon or J&J, or take your pick of big monstrous company, Google, Amazon, guess what they say when you say, well, why are you doing that? What's the word that they say?
Because I can.
Because, and like, what the hell can you do with because? Not a damn thing. So it's like, it doesn't move the conversation forward at all. And so we talk a lot about how to ask effective questions so that you're moving a conversation forward all of the time. Any other questions? I know we're a few minutes over.
I was thinking, Christine, this is Payla Walker. I was thinking about your comment about just using negotiations in other than hostage, in other than really out there kind of situations. And I think about to me, it's about a relationship. Like, I'm just curious, instead of asking why, typically I'll ask, that's interesting. How does that work for you?
Mm-hmm.
How does that get you? What is it, what you want? Or like, how does that work for you? I'm just being curious. And I tell people, I practice the art of curiosity. I'm really curious, like, how does that work for you? Now, I don't have to agree with it. It's not a judgment or anything like that. And I found that if you can do that, if you could do that, it really helps. So in ways, so I sit on a lot of nonprofit boards, and I'm the 2019 Philanthropist of the Year award winner in the state of California. 43% of all nonprofits in the United States are in California. So that's a huge deal. I've helped raise $63.2 million over the last 24 months to include this pandemic. And it all starts out with everybody thinks and it's all about what works for them. And it's a negotiation to get them to think or understand that in my opinion, from where I come from, everybody is a philanthropist. They just don't know it. And so what is it that you are personally, passionately interested in that you would maybe want to make a difference? Maybe not now, but maybe for the future. So I'm training somebody now, even if I don't get money from them for whatever it is that they're interested in, I'm helping move the needle further into the future, legacy, all that kind of stuff. And so it really does matter in just a normal, everyday kind of conversation to be curious as opposed to the back and forth.
And curiosity is the number one required skill set and attribute to be an effective negotiator.
I mean, I have an agenda. I just don't need to share or work off that agenda. Like, I have an outcome that I'd like, but I don't put that forth because that might not be your agenda.
Well, I mean, because I went to Harvard, I use Harvard cases in my course. And I was just, talking. So Lyra works with me, and we were just talking about, I have a class tomorrow, and we were just talking about, the case we're going through. And, one of the challenges when you have a scoring case, so this case study can be scored. So the participants will see that there's a winner and there's not a winner. And, and Stever went to Harvard, and that's how Stever and I know each other. And, the problem with that is it eliminates, and this is the challenge I have, like with how some companies approach the sales process. They're so fixated on that number, which is how we keep score, that it eliminates the opportunity to create value in non-quantitative ways that actually can move the business forward so much more significantly than just by focusing on the number. And so but we can't discover that if we don't start assigning value to things that aren't necessarily, that they don't appear 100% quantifiable. Because, if you're, so they're just, there's so many intangibles, and it's that curiosity and looking at the whole of the relationship that's how you get to discover what those things are. And the number of deals that I've gone into where I thought this is what I want my outcome to be, and then I got schooled, and I was like, oh shit, if I hadn't asked that question, man, we would never have gotten to this really freaking amazing deal, right? And so there's a point of understanding, like at Harvard, and the professors and I used to kind of get into it over a couple of things. We'd have spirited discussions. And, one of the things that drives me nuts is BATNA, right? So to me, BATNA is called the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And so it's essentially, what's your walk away? And you hear negotiators talk about this term all the time. People, what's your BATNA? What's your BATNA? What's your walk away? What's your walk away? A guy named Stuart Diamond, who's a professor out of Wharton, actually, he also has an issue with the concept of BATNA, but he also talks about just staying and negotiating and negotiating and negotiating. And I'm like, I don't have time for that stuff either. So it's like, when it really is, what's that no, and how am I leveraging no to create all the value that I need? And the thing is that if somebody says no to me, I don't remember. I don't have the, if you go to the website, so there's a website called whynotaskbook.com. And if you put your name in there, you get a little gift, which has an infographic. And I actually use this quote in the book: except for sex, no is an invitation to ask another question. Except in sex, no is an invitation to ask another question. Because no, what are you saying no to? Is it no to the whole thing of what I just said or asked or whatever? Is it just a part of it? Is it a visceral reaction? What's driving the no? What alternatives might exist? If this is no, what alternatives might exist? What about this can you not do? What about this are you reacting to? There's just so many other questions that you can ask to discover and explore other options. And, to your question, Paul, that's what people don't do effectively, right? They don't go into the negotiation with adequate hypotheses about their counterpart and what drives and motivates their counterpart. And they don't spend enough time exploring their counterpart's point of view. They look at it, and we've been taught by movies and politicians and this constant scorekeeping thing. We've been taught to go in and say, I either win or I lose, and if you win, that means I lose. And that's how we have been taught. I don't care about win-win. I think that the concept of win-win is largely bullshit. And I told my professors that because it's not how the human brain works. We think stop, we think go, we think win, we think lose. It's binary. It's not this win-win thing is what big companies say to small companies while they're screwing you, and it's like, it's there, that doesn't exist. So how do you find a solution that may not be win-win, but where everybody gets more of what it is that they want? And you do that by having a really solid hypothesis and testing it at the negotiation table. And, one of the things I say all the time when I'm speaking is, I'll be in front of an audience. I'll say, when you're at the negotiation table, who's the most important person? And most people say, I am. And I'm like, no, if you're the most important person at the negotiation table, then you're completely missing the point of what effective negotiation is.
Have you seen that show, Ted Lasso?
I love that show, but don't say a word about season 2 because I have not binged it yet.
It's already happened, but what I remember is he quotes Walt Whitman and says, be curious, not judgmental. And it's right there, Walt Whitman in Ted Lasso, just everyday stuff. But I was thinking about
that we're not curious enough about ourselves. So judging is something we do when we are afraid to look at ourselves. And so curiosity about oneself is that moment when like for me with the book, and am I perfect at this? Hell no. I wish I was perfect at this, but it's like with the book, I'm feeling a certain way, acknowledging it and saying, okay, I choose not to react to this feeling right now. I choose to explore what's causing me to feel this way. And then I can react accordingly, right? It's my husband, of 28 years, hearing me tell somebody on a Zoom call early in the pandemic where I lived, and my husband going, shh, really loudly. And my going, what the actual hell was that? And him being super angry, me being super angry, and my standing up and saying, you embarrassed me on a business meeting, and him saying, you scared me for your safety. It's that moment when we acknowledge that we feel this way, and then we both say, we could have handled that differently. And the same is true in business. If we just give ourselves permission to do that. And when we do, whether the relationship moves forward or whether the relationship severs, whether it's like the divorced couple that I told you about, or partnerships, business partnerships where people go their separate ways. In either case, you can do that in a way, like Stever's situation, you can do that in a way that by exploring and acknowledging how people feel allows people to do that in a way that's constructive and not destructive.
But I think from my experience, what you're talking about takes a heck of a lot of self-awareness. It takes a heck of a lot of critical thinking and introspection and actually caring to understand the other, because you have to understand yourself to understand the other. And one of the things, I own a marketing and printing company. We print for Jamba Juice, Jelly Belly, Pete's Coffee, Ace Hardware, Michelin Tires, the VA, big companies. And we go back to them every year and say, we ask them 2 questions. What works about us for you, and what doesn't work about us for you? And we don't say good or bad, because one company could say something that's good to the next company could say that's the bad thing. So it doesn't really matter to us. But one of the things I was curious about what you said is, when we talk to those people, and I'm the president, CEO and I go every year and we go talk to these customers. And one of the interesting things is that the price is always at the bottom. It's like number 5 or 6, and price is just used to get rid of people. So that's one of the things that I'm acutely aware of, or they'll say it's too expensive. And my question is, as opposed to what? Mm-hmm. So it's always too expensive as opposed to something. You're weighing a judgment against something. So it's incumbent upon me to find out or understand or be curious about what that is. Maybe they're losing something in a production line and they're losing a whole bunch of money. I have to ask them, is that a problem for you? Nah, I don't care if we're losing that amount of money. Oh, okay. Then we're not talking about anything. If they say yes, now we're having a different discussion. So it's like the gas companies, they don't care that methane is leaking through all their pipes, because it's costing them more to fix it than to just let it go. But from a climate perspective, it's a really bad thing. So now bad in comparison to what? Money or the climate. So anyway.
Yeah, the Institute
So
of
it's actually-
Supply Management has done a lot of research, and typically for most buyers, price is usually around number 5 in
Right.
terms of level of importance.
Yeah, it's.
And in certain categories, depending on what you sell, they also have shown that you can actually raise your prices by as much as 40% on your existing customers before they're actually switched,
Yeah, I mean,
which is kind of shocking to most people. And now your switching costs need to be a little bit high. Like I know what Brian does, and his switching costs for his clients is really high. So he does very specialized work for the space industry. And so, that's that makes that price sensitivity different. So, but these are all things that if somebody sells products that have lots of steel in them, and their customer comes and says, I want, steel prices are, the supplier comes and says, steel prices are going up and and I need to recover some of that. It's like, yeah, but relative to what time frame, right? How does that relate to what steel prices were when we entered into our agreement? And so asking those kind of questions is really, really valuable. Are there other questions? I know we are over time. I am so grateful for every one of you guys. I mean, I
have
can
a quick
sit and
question
stay.
for you.
Yes. Hi, Cindy.
Negotiation.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good to see you.
You too. Negotiation in real estate, which I'm kind of surprised nobody brought up, because that is truly a game of negotiation. I actually just went through something where the other agent that was representing the seller was from the get-go not going to partake in the agreement. She was going to do her own thing and drag it out. And it was a pretty rotten transaction. And when I look at the outcome of it, I think, okay, she's ruined her chance of ever working with anybody I know again. And so has Coldwell Banker. They've burned a very major bridge. But that to me can be one of the toughest areas to negotiate in. Not that it's as emotional, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of room for discussion.
So one of the things about real estate that's very interesting, especially on the residential side, and I'm not talking development, is that we have made buying and selling real estate about the same level of transparency and everything as buying and selling a used car. We have turned it into a very transactional process, and we haven't, which breeds a certain personality type that kind of are barracudas in the space. And I see this, when I talk to people who are gurus and all that kind of stuff. And I see that kind of mentality. The thing that I do though, in those situations is I'm really big on naming and labeling things. So I was in a deal. Oh, I'm actually still in the deal. And this guy behaved in a way that wasn't really cool to anybody, not just to me, but to anybody. And the shit that I've been done and seen as a woman in negotiation would make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. But I literally, so this guy did something, and so he did it. And I said, so is it okay if I ask you a question? And he said, sure. And I said, are you trying to piss me off? And he's like, what do you mean? I said, well, you pissed me off. And so I'm trying to figure out if that was your intended reaction. I said, so did you intend to push a button and to piss me off? No, I didn't intend to do that. Well, what intention were you going for? What was your objective with that statement or that question? Right. Now I've said, now I've been able to, name and label my emotion and my reaction. 2, I gave him an opportunity to name and label his intention. and I gave him a way out of it. Right. So I didn't pass judgment on him. I didn't do anything. I didn't get pissed off. You know, I was just like, I am getting pissed off. Right. But I gave him an opportunity to fix it. Right. Now, let's say that it turned out that it was a tone thing and it wasn't what he intended. But let's say that it was, right. Let's say he intended, and, Tom actually might know this client that I'm actually going to talk about, but when I was working at Pulse, there was a particular account that was out of the Southeast that had a negotiator in Ireland, and he was an asshole. I mean, he with all cap letters, exclamation points.
Tell us how you really feel about it.
Oh my God. And he was horrible to Juniper people. He was horrible to everybody on our team. He was just he just chose to come off as a very horrible person. And he wouldn't engage. He wouldn't get on the phone. He just would not engage. He'd send long, nasty emails and essentially say, it's my way or the highway.
Mhm.
Right. So, you know, so how do you get somebody like that to engage with you? So what I did is we had a lot of common connections. So I started making phone calls, and I called some of those common connections, and their universal reaction, I say that and it's like 3 people. But they said,
Small universe.
it was, and they're in big companies. All 3 of them said, I'm so sorry you have to deal with this guy. He's really an asshole. So my reaction was, and I should have checked this with I should have told my boss I was doing this before I actually did it, which I didn't do. So he had sent me one of his nasty grams, and I fired off a 1-sentence response. And I said, it's good to know that our mutual acquaintances are correct about you. You can take that any way you want to. He dove to the negative because he's an asshole. And he sent my CFO, my CEO, he sent the chairman of the board a 5-page letter about how horrible I was and this and that and the other thing. But you know what happened? He moved. He had to take action. And we got to negotiate that deal. Now, I wasn't the face of the deal. Our chief counsel was, but I was in the room whenever those meetings took place, and I'm hitting mute, telling my lawyer, this is what to say in this situation. This is what he's trying to do. This is what's consistent or inconsistent with our strategy. I still negotiated 100% of the deal. I just put a different face in front of the guy. You know, but I got a reaction. When I'm dealing with really aggressive people or people who I question their intent, only 10%, that champion style, is the only negotiation style who truly is intent on annihilating you. And so when you see that personality or that style come out, the first question or the first assumption isn't this is a champion and he or she is just an asshole and there are just as many women of them as there are guys. So there's no, you know, there's
gender bias.
There's some slight gender differences in how we negotiate, but generally research shows that there's not huge differences in how men and women negotiate. But when you're in that situation, the first question, when I'm in that situation, the first thing I ask is, what did I do or say that triggered this individual? And what are they reacting to in this moment, in this situation? And then I'll ask questions about it.
You just showed up. That was it.
There you go. So, isn't negotiation in the manner that your purpose win-win is true sense? Paul, do you mind coming off me, or do you mind asking that?
Yeah,
I'm not sure I'm reading it right.
Okay, no, that's all right. I'm just saying, isn't negotiation in the manner that you propose, in the true sense, win-win? that when we often have people that refer to, well, we just want a win-win, that's not actually what they truly mean. They're actually wanting to win and you to lose, but they just dress it up as win-win as part of their tactic to try and convince you to accept their position. But as you describe, when you take the effort to really understand their positions, and both parties do that, isn't that ultimately going to achieve the best outcome and in fact be in the true sense of it win-win?
Yeah, it is. I just rebel against the use of the term because it's just not, but yeah, I mean, and the thing is that when the concept of win-win was created, professors at Harvard used an orange to describe it. I use an egg, which I have one sitting on my desk. So I use an egg to describe the concept of win-win. So this one I haven't done, but usually if I'm speaking, I go out in my refrigerator right before I speak and I pull an egg out of the carton. Now, I don't know, Paul is in Australia and I don't know if you put eggs in the refrigerator. We do stupid shit to our eggs, so we have to refrigerate the damn things. But I go and I pull one out of the carton, right? And 3 people want this egg, right? How do you get 3 people this egg? Right? Now, when I ask this question, people usually say that they're going to scramble it and share it. They're going to make an omelet. Lyra says she's going to hatch it and make more chickens. And there's all sorts of things that people come up with about what to do with the egg. But and some people will say, I'm going to crack it and then I'll have the shell, the yolk, and the white. Well, that's close. Because if I take and I poke a hole in the top and the bottom and I blow on it, I can still separate the yolk and the white. And I have a fully intact eggshell that I can turn into a piece of art. And if you go online, Ukrainian Easter eggs can sell for hundreds of dollars. Right.
You do that with my 7 and 5-year-old nieces. That exact thing you're talking about. It's so fun.
Right. And so win-win is asking effective questions. What do you want to use the egg for? Right. How are you going to use the egg? Right. I mean, even if you just crack the egg, you can still compost the shell, but it's still worth more value as an Easter egg. As a piece of art. So the concept of win-win, it's in its original form. I agree with what it was intended to be, but what it has become is a weapon that large companies use, or that overpowering individuals use to beat you up with, to say, hey, this is a win-win. So Walmart is a classic example. I had this conversation with somebody, and one of his companies that he's invested in just landed a contract with Walmart. And he's like, is it a shitty deal? Yeah, it's a shitty deal, but it's going to catapult them. And I'm like, you didn't need to do a shitty deal with Walmart. There's actually great ways of negotiating with Walmart that don't result in shitty deals. But that's what has ended up happening, is these big companies use it as this nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It's a win-win just because you signed the damn contract. And it's not a win-win just because you sign the contract. Tom, thank you so much for being here. We're way over, so I will not feel bad if anyone has to leave or anything. So I'm grateful that you guys have hung out this late for me. So some of you are on the East Coast. So, and Paul, let's see, what time is it there?
It is.
Just wait till we publish books.
What, Paul?
It's 1:30 in the afternoon, and I haven't had lunch, Christine, so I'm getting really hungry.
Go grab
and
lunch.
I'm like you, I get grumpy when I get hungry too, which is even worse.
But so overall, I mean, I know Farhana had put the link in to buy the book. If you haven't bought it yet, please write. If you have bought it, please write a review. If you I am going to be recording an audio version of it. I just have not had a chance to do that yet. But I'll let everybody know once the audio is available. And I am starting a new, our next Venn Masters program starts on the 4th of November. And it is a 6-week program. And then we have 2 days of intensive practice. You will do as many Harvard case studies as a first-year Harvard MBA in the program. And so, and it's an amazing, the feedback that we're getting is really very positive about how it's just changed how people are willing to ask for what they want and the questions they ask both themselves and their counterparts in the negotiation process. And then Farhana, did you want to, because I'm not reading exactly, where do you want to, I'll post, thanks Tom Barnes, post reviews on Amazon. The more reviews I can get on Amazon, the happier the algorithm is. So Farhana, thank you for posting that, that link in.
Where can we buy the book other than Amazon?
So you can buy it anywhere. Other stores will just have to order it. Farhana, did you put my PayPal in? Oh, you're on mute.
In the chat, there is the Venmo handle and the Zelle phone number that you guys can pay $19.99 for the book, and Christine will sign it to you. So in the Venmo or the Zelle, in your note, put your address.
Just went way above my pay grade. I just wanted to go to a bookstore and buy the book. We don't.
I haven't
patronize
released it.
Amazon at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's fine. I can send you a copy. And we can talk offline, Paulo, but right now it's, they have to order it because I haven't released it to, there's a strategy about keeping it in Amazon for a certain period of time before you let it out so that they work their magic.
You want to put your address in the chat, and I can have Christine contact you and send you one.
Tom, the class is it's for 6 weeks and a 2-day, it's for 2 hours each week. There's a slight adjustment because of the holiday, and then the 2-day event will be in January. So we're going to do the 6 weeks prior to Christmas, and then we'll do the 2-day event in January. And the 2-day event in January will be virtual, but I will also be starting live events in 2022. And so whoever signs up for the virtual event will be able to attend the live event. I haven't finalized where that's going to be or the dates yet, so I will be able to let you know. But so for people who are interested, I retail this course for $49.95, and I'm doing scholarships for $3,500. So for right now, and then somebody tonight is going to win a full scholarship to the program.
So just for the record, you do know, as a UC Berkeley graduate, master's degree, undergraduate in economics, you do know that Forbes named it the #1 school in the country this year, right? Just FYI. My dad's a Harvard grad and his wife's a Stanford grad, so we go round and round.
Oh yeah.
All the time.
Well, here's the reason why I went to Harvard. There are 2 reasons why I went to Harvard. I had traveled and worked in many countries, and when I went to a remote tea plantation on the island of Java, the people on the plantation had heard of Harvard. That was one. And 2, it was the last MBA program to not require a GMAT. And that is the second reason.
Yes, that was why I went also.
Well, lucky you guys.
Yeah, we were the last year. That was the last year. Then after that.
When did you go? What year? I'm
I graduated in 98.
Oh, you're way younger than me. Oh, okay. Well, you went less. I was in 76.
Oh, okay.
Got it. 76 to 80.
Yeah, no. So yeah, so those are the 2 reasons why I went to Harvard. So
got it. Somebody has to go. Might as well be you.
Yeah, it worked. It worked for me. Thank you, Paul. Go get some lunch. Martin, it was great to see you again. I'll see you on Friday.
Sounds good.
Martin, Pello, you guys are both part of High Rise. So,
See you Friday.
yep. See you Friday. Marilyn, thank you for coming. So at the beginning of I think at the beginning, I told about how you came to visit me last week, and what an honor that was. And it was the highlight of my week that you did that. And it goes in my accomplishments journal that you came in and did that. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful for you.
I was just as thrilled to meet you as well. It was such a blessing. And I just couldn't, I had the book, I read the book. I was like, I have to go find this woman. She's in Atlanta. I'm going to get her to sign my book. So it was awesome to meet you. Thank you.
Likewise. So,
Did you,
all right. Well,
did you get that little blurb I sent you about the negotiation between the man and the woman about getting married?
the one that you sent me on LinkedIn?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I did.
Oh my God, that was, as soon as I saw that, I went, okay, I gotta send this. That's truly a negotiation, sort of.
Yes.
But anyway,
Marilyn,
everybody, make it a great day and be safe out there.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
Christine,
day.
for
And it was,
everything.
thank you, Richard. It was so awesome to see you. We should reconnect. And Steve, I'll give you a call.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I'm already
wonderful.
on your calendar.
Okay, awesome. Thank you,
Thank
everyone. Have a
you.
wonderful evening. Cheers.
Steve.
Great
Bye.
job.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.